And so it is. Let's talk about practical authentication. So let's walk through the steps that we need to do. I want to color. Cool. So I'm on, this is the client, this is the server. Oops. A little bit straighter. Okay, so let's walk through the things that need to happen in order for us to meaningfully use authentication. So client is going to send a request to the server to create a user. And then server is going to take that and it's going to hash the password, create the user. Cool. So that was step one. Step two. Is you're going to send those credentials to login. Login is going to validate the username and password. And then it's going to issue a token. And it's going to send it back. That was step two. Step three was we were going to do whatever request, something that we need to protect. And then this is going to validate the token and then send back the resource. So our high-level overview of what's happening in this whole auth thing is right there. Ask me some questions about what's happening in this diagram.
So once you send back the token, where's the token stored to be able to send that back to your server side?
Great question. You can do it a few different ways. You can store it in a variable. Most common way to do it, though, is to put in local storage. So this thing gets the token back. Store in local storage. And then you're going to send that over in the authorization header with any subsequent requests. Good question. What else?
Could you go over what that looks like at some point in this lesson?
Yep, we are gonna do it.
Awesome.
What else?
When you're posting a new user and you're sending like the username and password as plain text, like in the header or in the body, is that encrypted, or how does that work? Is it ever more complicated than just like doing what we've always done?
Super good question. Yeah, what does any of this matter if we're sending over username and password, plain text in the request? that is where HTTPS comes in. So those of you who've been using the internet for a second might remember that HTTP was what we used everywhere. And then there was a period of time where they're like, no, don't log into your bank with HTTP. And then nowadays we use HTTPS basically everywhere. It's weird to see something that's just HTTP. So let's talk about how it works, because it's kind of interesting. So this is my computer. And I make a request somewhere. I want to make a secure request to Google. I'm logging into Gmail, something like that. There's a couple different things that happen before my client gets to Google's server. This is its server. It's got little hard drives and a beep and a boop. All right. So this is Google's server. This is my computer. Maybe give me any ideas of what things are in between these two things? I don't make the request to it directly, at least not right away.
There's DNS.
Mm-hmm. So DNS isn't super important for this problem, but it is in there. What is DNS?
Domain naming service.
Yep. So when I type, I'm making a post request to login.gmail.com or something. It goes, cool, I don't know what gmail.com is. All I know is IP addresses. DNS is a phone book that looks up what IP address goes with gmail.com. All right, so I get the IP address back, then what?
Then you're sending the request to that IP address.
Ah, what happens in between there? So this server is at the IP address, but there's some things that happen in between there before it gets there.
You encode a packet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, probably several packets.
Yeah, probably a couple of them. So if I'm on Wi-Fi, it probably also goes to an access point. Those big, if you're ever in an office building and see those circular, like, they kind of look like giant white hockey pucks. That's what's broadcasting out that Wi-Fi signal. You're probably making the request to that. There might even be a network of those. Then it's probably going to the router. Even if you're wired, it's going to do that at some point. So that's like in your house, that's the router that came from your ISP.
If you're in a corporate setting, there'd be a firewall.
Yep. So then there's a firewall, there's all kinds of other stuff. Probably also pass through your ISP at some point. There might be little relays. And then it gets to Google server. Okay, well, wait a minute. If I just sent you my username and password, and each of these things is just forwarding it along, they can see the request. That's the whole point, is that they're passing that request along. So when they tell you like, oh, be real careful about using the Starbucks Wi-Fi to do banking stuff. Well, if you're on HTTP, it's because anybody who controls that router can see all the traffic that's coming through. And so if you set your username and password, well, anybody who controls that router can see that also. Also your ISP. Also any of these computers that are in between. And like, if you've ever heard of a pineapple, that's that was a minor plot point in Silicon Valley a couple years ago. That's attacking right there. Yeah, I'll give you internet. I'll also inspect all of your traffic. Cool. So we need a way to make it so that the only people who know what's actually being sent are my computer and the Google server. So this is where HTTPS comes in. HTTPS is kind of a fucking brilliant scheme that allows my computer and Google server to come up with an encryption scheme in real time so that we encrypt. You can't encrypt everything, but you can encrypt the headers and you can encrypt the body. Can't encrypt the location. These things do need to know where to send it. But we can encrypt everything else. And now, access point doesn't know what your username and password is. Now it is router, now it is your ISP, now it is relays. We don't need to trust any of these things. So we're not going to talk about how that works because it's kind of complicated. But if you go to my knowledge wiki, I have a breakdown of the steps because they are pretty interesting. Go under security, HTTPS, in the development section. These are all of the steps to dynamically do that encryption. And it happens like that. It's so cool. But yeah, that is why we can send a username and password in plain text without being worried that it's being intercepted. Super good question. More questions at a high level. What's happening with any of this?
So how do we like invoke HTTPS?
It's part of the scheme. So when you type in a URL, there's a couple things that will like get assumed. If you just type google.com into your browser, it puts the HTTPS in there for you. That's a courtesy the browser is giving you. That didn't always used to be the case. It used to default to HTTP. And before that, it didn't default to shit. And you had to type it out by hand every time. But every modern browser will assume that you want to use the HTTPS scheme when you're sending a request. And that's why if you make a request to like an old site that doesn't have an HTTPS certificate, it'll go, whoa, 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 whoa. You were trying to connect with HTTPS to this old piece of shit. It only works with HTTP. Are you sure you want to do this? Because we don't recommend it. And you'll know that you've connected with HTTPS successfully when that little lock up in the corner, connection secure. Pretty cool. Other questions about what this workflow looks like?
Is it similar for apps? Like if you're using like your mobile banking app on Starbucks Wi-Fi, is it like the same thing?
Yes. So I taught you guys JOTs. One of the reasons for that is that JOTs work identically with native apps. So desktop, mobile native app, any of those, like the JOT workflow is identical. It's the exact same thing. The cookies and sessions workflow, that doesn't work with native apps because native apps don't have a concept of cookies. That's a browser idea. But JOTs work the same with both of them.
So is cookies and sessions an alternative to using JOT?
Correct. It solves the exact same problem in a different way. And there's trade-offs to them too. I wouldn't say that like cookies and sessions are dead or anything. The biggest difference is that if you have a valid JOT, server can't tell that like you got fired an hour ago or that we were supposed to revoke your access or something like that. If you have a valid JOT, it's good until the expiration period. Now, if like that means you get an extra hour out of your Netflix subscription after it expires, who gives a shit? It's not that big a deal. If that means that like that person you just fired still has access to like all the internal services for an extra hour, maybe that matters more. So a session is revocable like instantly. You just delete a record in a database, and now that person can't log in anymore.
Ahmed was talking about like a blacklist to like kind of get around that. I was wondering if JOT, like if you can specify when you're using JOT the expirations.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can specify the expiration, and you can maintain a blacklist. And so then, let's say your blacklist gets pretty big, so you sort in a database. And at this point, you have recreated sessions and cookies. Now, if like your blacklist is short enough to keep in memory, maybe it's a different story, but that is a challenge between those two. More questions about what's happening in this diagram?
So a session cookie is something that's being tracked like from the server side.
Correct.
And that, okay.
Well, the cookie is a client-side thing. The session is the server-side thing. But yeah, it's being stored in a database, which you may be saying, oh shit, I need to hit the database every time I want to look something up. Yes, which is slow and expensive. And also, all right, I need to have a database that can handle however many like concurrent sessions that I have. There might be 100,000 of those. There might be 1 million of those, 1 billion. I got to keep scaling my database just to be able to handle a bunch of logins. Yup, that's a downside of sessions. You could, it's even an attack vector. You could attack somebody by just trying to make so many sessions that you just fill up their databases.
Right. Is that kind of similar to a DDoS attack, or am I misinterpreting what a DDoS attack is?
No, I mean, it's also an attack, and it also happens by just hammering something really fast. But no, I guess it kind of would be, because yeah, if you filled up all the sessions, you would be denying service. So that's a DDoS.
It's just not by stopping the internet, it's by filling up the server.
Well, that's kind of what a DDoS is anyway. Like, so DDoS, for anybody who doesn't know, distributed denial of service attack. So a denial of service attack is, all right, well, any server can only process so many requests at once. And so if you try to intentionally make it serve more requests than it's able to, then it can't respond to anything. So you have denied service. So you could just make a little bot that does nothing but send HTTP requests every millisecond to something until it overwhelms it. And now nobody can access that site anymore. So that's a denial of service attack. Now you go, okay, well, we're getting a bajillion requests a second from this one IP address. So you just ban all requests from that IP address. All right. Now a DDoS is if you had that bot running on a bunch of different IP addresses, so you couldn't just block an IP address. There's no pattern to it. You can't tell where the attacks are coming from. That's a distributed denial of service attack.
At our stage in the game, should we even be worried about fighting something like that?
Don't. You'll figure it out. Like in these like first 15 weeks of your career, that's probably not like the best use of your time. If your first job expects you to be on top of like the DDoS attacks and shit for the company, they kind of deserve whatever they get. Which coincidentally is also a little bit how I feel about Auth. If you're putting like the person who's been doing this for 4 months in charge of your Auth system, yeah, maybe you kind of get whatever you get from that. Cool. Other questions high level about how this works?
So are you teaching us Auth basically so that like when we are like actually running websites, we don't like run into some major problems with our own websites, but like we won't be like in charge of handling security in the companies that we're like going to work for?
And also like you need to learn it at some point. May as well start now. But like as a professional responsibility, this is not what I would have my new people working on. I think that's kind of irresponsible. But I think now is a perfect time to start practicing. And yeah, do it for your own apps. But every time I see like, oh, we hired someone new and they took the company down by this one weird query or something, like that's not the new person's fault. That's the company's fault. Why was it so fucking easy for your brand new person to do that? Why did you put them in a position like that where they could fail so hard? I don't think that's the new person's fault ever. Sounds like, frankly, they did the company a favor by exposing a massive architectural weakness in their app.
Could we possibly do an example of like fetching a token from the front end and then handling it? Like it could be in like vanilla JavaScript just to show like what you're doing with it, how you're using it.
That's exactly what we're going to do. Any more questions about this high level? Cool. So what I want to do now is I want to show you what all of these steps look like all together. Let's make a new app. All right, so what's the app? Give me a noun.
Laser beams.
Laser beams. Okay, so I'm going to call this Laser Fortress. All right, so nothing up this sleeve, nothing up this sleeve. So I am going to, let's start with the front end on this. So I'm going to make an index.html file, and I'm going to make an app.js file. And in this index.html file, I'm going to scaffold out all the things that we need for an HTML document. Ah, come on, man. Monday or Tuesday, I guess, for everybody. So this is going to have a user sign up form. And it's going to take, it's going to do inputs. It's going to have a username. And a password. Make the type on this password. That's gonna obfuscate. It's gonna make everything you type little dots. And cool. So we'll call this one user sign up. All right, cool. So now let's bring in that script file. And over here, I will get the user sign up form. And what was that, user sign up? Yeah, user dash sign up. Cool. Now let's add a submit handler to it. That takes in the event. Prevents the default behavior. It should get out, let's see, take in the form data. And we'll grab the username and the password. Let's see, did I give that one a name? Yes, I did. All right, so I get those. And then to sign up, I need to do something like fetch to localhost 4000/users. Should be a post request. Should have a content type of application JSON. And its body should be a stringified username and password. And whenever it comes back, I'm going to make it reload the page. I think that's how that works. Let's see.
Can I ask a quick question about what you just did?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, would it be possible for you to real quickly go over in that form what data type each of those keys has to be? Because I noticed that the actual fetch call you're making, the object that you're putting in is a JavaScript object, but then headers is a JavaScript object that specifically has to have quotes around the key, and then the body.
Slow down. It doesn't need to have quotes around the key. It needs to have quotes because of that dash. Dash isn't a valid, like, I can't do that. That's going to barf at me because I have a dash in it. Put a quotes around it, I can put whatever I want.
Okay.
And then the body, JSON isn't the only thing that we can send over in a body. We can send all kinds of weird shit. But we can't send a JavaScript object. It needs to ultimately just be characters. So by stringifying it, we're turning a JavaScript object into just some characters.
So it could be a JSON object, like a CSV object or something like that. Any kind of those string.
There should be a string that says hi, but it can't be a JavaScript object.
Gotcha.
Cool. What else?
Is there a particular reason that you use the $ in the variable name?
Yep. Who can tell me why, or tell all of us why why I really like the $?
Isn't it a Laravel thing?
Nope. It was a jQuery thing, but I think it's still useful.
I thought you said you used it before like HTML elements, but
Mm-hmm. Exactly what it is. I use it to indicate that something is an HTML element, or a DOM element, I guess more specifically. But user signup form, is that an object that I will use to create a user signup form, or I don't know. It's just a hint to myself and the next person that I'm working with a DOM element there.
So it's just sort of a naming convention.
Just a naming convention. That's it.
Thank you.
What else?
so you're fetching right here to HTTP. Why
Mhm.
would you not specify like HTTPS?
Oh, such a good question. Any guesses on that? I actually can't specify HTTPS.
Because we don't currently know how to build an API with HTTPS.
Nope. Good guess.
You can't do HTTPS locally.
You can't do HTTPS locally. Well, you can, but like it sort of defeats the purpose. So the whole reason that we wanted that security was because we don't trust any of these people. Localhost, I'm just doing it with myself. There's no one to not trust. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that part of the mechanics of how HTTPS works is that there's a third party that's validating both of your identities. And what third party is going to validate to my computer that the rest of my computer is who it says it is? And so you can actually fake your way around that with what's called a self-signed certificate. But if you do that, then it's going to go, whoa, 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 you're making HTTPS request to somebody who signed their own certificate. And so your browser's still going to be mad at you for no gain. So when you're working with localhost, it's still HTTP.
When you're working with a deployed website, you would specify HTTPS.
Correct.
Okay.
And if you're using Firebase or Heroku or any of those kinds of things, you get it for free. Great question. What else? Cool. With just this, I should be able to like sort of kind of do that thing. Let me handle the error real quick. All right, so if I run this front end, all right, so I got this user sign up. Cool. So if I do Kyle and, oh, I need a submit button. That helps. Right. Try it again. All right, I should be able to try to do this and make it get mad at me for not having a backend. There we go. Connection refused, but otherwise I have a user sign up. All right, so we shift over to the backend. Rails new -- API backend. All right, so if I hop over here, we can start going through our steps. So for just user sign up, we needed a Rails G model user. We needed a users controller. And want to go into this gem file, we throw in bcrypt and bundle install, and go over to our router and say resources, users, but solamente. Create. Then in our controller, made the create action, user.create, username is params, username, password, then we just send that one on back. Cool, and then in the model, we did has secure password, and then the migration for that model, we kept track of their username and their password digest. Cool, so we should be good to go on the back end. If I migrate.
Did you do the course thing?
Oh yeah, I should probably do the course thing. Good call. Good looking out. And let's see if we can make user accounts. So I'll call this, well, both servers here. So for the front end, this is going to be light server. For the back end, this is going to be Rails S on port 4000. Whoop. Oh, I need to install course too. Cool. And all right, now there we go. So I should be able to enter in a username and a password and have it refresh the page. And it looks like that's exactly what happened. Now, moment of truth. Hey, look, looks like it came back okay. So next thing that we want to do is we should be able to take a look inside that database and see if it made my user. So I'm going to SQLite backend DB that development database. Select all from users. Hey, oops, made 2 of them. Oh, it might have, that reload might have tried to do it twice. Whatever, I got 2 accounts now. Cool. Any questions about step 1?
Can you show me the JavaScript really fast?
Mm-hmm. So we just read a username and a password out of a form, send it over to the back end. That's it.
Are we going to cover error handling in this lesson as far as like?
No.
Okay.
But like, I don't know, something other than the way you do it is take the response and then you could do something like if you got a bad status code back, if you got a 400 or a 500 back, then get some DOM element, make its text say an error. That's it.
The part that's tripping me up about that is the error messages that you get from Rails are not consistent in like what key it comes back
Yeah,
in.
don't use Rails's error message.
Okay, so if you're like, let's say you have like a user form or something like that, and you want to be like, oh, your username is already exists in the database.
Mm-hmm.
How would you get that message if it's not from Rails?
You write it out. You don't have to use Rails's error message in the user interface, but you can still read it. So that might be something like maybe you parse the body response here, and then you go, okay, well, if the error code is 400, then that means that we will get the error, which is document.query selector error, and then set errors text content to please pick a different username or password. Something like that.
So for every error message that you have like on the back end, you could just have like different status codes, and you could say like, if it's this status code, render this error message on the front end.
You could, but there's a pretty limited number of things that can go wrong here, right? So username isn't unique. So maybe you have, I wouldn't use a different status code for all those. All those are 400s, which are a bad request. But you could say, all right, if I got back status code 400, which is going to come back as not okay, and then if it's not okay, and I start parsing the response, and it has a Kyle Coberly error code of 2, I go, okay, well, if the error code is 2, then set the context to you need a different username. If the error code is 3, it means that password didn't meet complexity requirements or whatever.
Can you show us how you would make that custom error code in Rails?
You make a hash. I mean, this.
Oh, it's just like you could be like you just render an object. Well, I guess a hash with a key.
You got it.
Name that key.
Yep.
But when you do something like validations, it seems like it automatically generates that for you. So then on the front end, how do you, like, for example, if I say username requires like 7 characters.
You can use those error messages if you want to. I'm telling you, you don't have to.
Gotcha.
If you don't like how they're phrased or whatever else, make up your own. And there's no magic to that. It's just making fetches, reading responses, writing apps. Very little of this stuff is magic.
Okay.
Bcrypt is magic. Has secure password is magic. This stuff, this is just variables and loops and if statements and that kind of stuff. Okay. Let me kill all that. Other questions about what we got here so far? Cool, so we can make a new account. Now, how would you log in with it? We'll make a login form. Works the same, works the same. We'll call that just login. Neat. So, we can call that login form. Yep. And this is going to start the exact same way. Login form submits, prevent default, grab the username and password. But this time, you're sending it to the login route. Otherwise, it works the same way. And then instead of reloading the page, we're expecting to get a token back from this. So let's parse the response. And then we'll take our response and like yank out the token. And so we could say that, destructure it out. The token is response. And for right now, let's just alert that we got the token back. That's it on the front end. It's just another form. Looks almost exactly like the user sign up form. Takes username and password, yanks those out of the form, post request, and then presuming we get this token back, we can quack something about it. On the back end, we want to be able to post to login, and we want to send that request to an authentication controller's login action. And then let's make that authentication, Rails G controller authentication. All right, it's so. While we're in here, let's go to the gem file and add the jot gem. It is so installed, and I think that's it. We go over to the authentication controller, we make a login action for it, and we wanted a couple things out of this. We want to check to see if they sent us a username at all. So we can say something like, if not params username, then render JSON error, no username, and give us a status of bad request. Actually, let's do unauthorized. Cool. Then we go, all right, well, did you give me, you gave me a username. Did you give me a password? So if there's no password, cool. Oh, we also wanted to, sorry, we wanted to look up the user. I got that wrong. It's a Monday somewhere for everybody. Username is.
So you're creating a user, so how are you looking them up? Or no, you're making a login right now. My bad.
Correct. And this isn't that. This is if not at user.authenticate. Authenticate is magic. That came in from the bcrypt gem. It's a black box. We don't know how it works. It just does. Compares the plain text password that they sent us with It hashes it. It does the comparison with the hash password we have in the database, does all that automatically. So assuming that all this authentication worked, and we want some kind of payload to send back. So we can say user ID is something like @user.id. We could say that the username is @user.username. And we want a secret. So we can grab the Rails application secret keybase. And then we can make a jot with jot.encode payload secret and fire it on back. Render JSON, token is token. And I'm going to say send back a created too. Okay. I'll bet that works. Let's see. So if I go over here and log in with Kyle and Kyle, oops, something didn't work. All right, I got a 500 back. So if I take a look at this, exception, uninitialized constant, authentication controller. Did I spell something wrong? But I spelled something wrong. Authentication login. Authentication login. Looks good. Might need to restart my server. Yeah, because I installed Jot, but I didn't restart the server. There we go. All right, let's try that again. Hey, look, I got a token back. So, question earlier about, all right, well, I have this token. Now, what do I do with it? This is what you do with it. We're going to local storage dot set item token. Local storage is kind of like variables that you have in your computer, but these persist between refreshes. The thing that you store has to be a string. It can be a JSON string. So if you have an object or something you want to keep, you can stringify it and store it in there. But otherwise, it's key and value. The key token, I want to set it to that string. Ta-da!
So you're supposed to set it in your authentication controller.
What was that?
You're supposed to store the token in local storage via the authentication controller.
So the authentication controller checks the username and password and sends back a token. That's all it does.
Oh, okay. What
I think it just
file
looked
are
you
you
were
in?
in your authentication controller because of the top of the screen, but that's the JavaScript file.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yes. So when we get this response back, we take the token out of it and we set it in local storage. Perhaps unsurprisingly, you can get something out of local storage with get item, but that's it. Pretty much all there is to it. So let's say we wanted to figure out whether or not we were logged in. So we could have something like class is logged in. And we put no in there. Now over here at the very beginning, before we do anything else, maybe we grab is logged in. Make that an ID. I made it a class. And then I say local storage dot get item token, say is logged in dot text content. Is that token there? If it is, should be yes. Otherwise, no. All right, so I am not logged in right now. Oops, one more thing I gotta do. Whenever that token comes back, I need to rerun this. So I can say, I can put that in a function. Say like set is logged in. Like that. I can run it at the beginning, like when the page first loads, and then I can do it again whenever that happens. All right. So I log in with Kyle and Kyle. I'm logged in now. Now, moment of truth. Can I refresh? I can, and I'm still logged in. I'm still logged in. You can even see it like be no, that like default value, and you can see it sort of flip to yes. If you go in your DevTools over to application, and then go to local storage for this domain, hey, look, there's my key, there's my value. Pretty cool.
So when you're using, when you're doing a similar thing for, let's say, like a React or a Vue app or something like that, I'm assuming you wouldn't store it in local storage. You would store it in some state. It seems like you usually store it in like Redux or Vuex or something like that. Is that the
No, you still need to use local storage. Local storage is the only tool you have, well, session storage also, but local storage and session storage are the only two tools that you have for keeping something alive after a refresh.
Can you go back to the JavaScript page?
Yeah.
Thanks. So you added a function at the top, right?
Yep, the set is logged in.
Okay. And then you called the function where?
Two places. One when the page first loads,
Oh.
and then again after you get the token back. That's a way you could do it. But yeah, John, Redux, Vuex stores, those kinds of things, like you need to populate them with something. So if it's something that's being stored client side and you need it to survive a refresh, local storage.
Can you show your set logged in function?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm in something like Vue, that would probably be a good use of like computed properties, would be setting the local storage and then grabbing it from
Sure.
there.
That works.
So is that set logged in function, is the syntax like a ternary?
Ternary, correct. So I want to set the text content of this element to either yes or no, and I want it to be determined by whether or not anything comes back from get item token. Other questions?
So how do you log back out?
Ah, great question. So if logging in is just storing something in that token, any guesses what logging out would be?
Could you just do like local storage dot remove item or something like that?
It's exactly what you do. And then we can reset that state. So yeah, let's say we make a button for that. Okay, so I've made this log out button. Like so.
Could you just keep the button as the class? Oh wait, no, sorry. I'm
Yeah,
getting
I
confused.
made it an ID.
Okay.
So I made that, and if I add an event listener to it, that's what we call it, right? Yeah. Add event listener, click. Whenever that gets clicked, I want to call log out. Actually, I'm going to move this over here. Because logging out and setting the thing, that's kind of two different things. I like keeping that separate. All right, so now I should be able to log out. All right, it says I'm logged in. Pew! I'm logged out. And look, it's out of my local storage too. Then I log in again. Pew! My token's there. I'm logged in. I log out. It's all gone.
Well, that was easier than expected.
Yes. Yeah, since the back end doesn't have any concept of you being logged in or not logged in,
Mm-hmm.
like it doesn't need to know anything about this. It's a purely client-side ordeal. All the back end can do, this is the downside of tokens also, but all the back end can do is tell you whether or not a token is valid.
Mm.
It doesn't know who the logged in users are.
So right now it's kind of arbitrary that we have a login and out. How do we make it like when you're trying to make there a reason someone has to be logged in, how do you actually use that?
Sure.
Like, for example, going to your profile page and you have editing capabilities that you wouldn't have if you weren't logged in, it would just say, it would show you maybe a generic profile.
Sure. So this gets a lot easier with the front end frameworks, just as a heads up. But you can still do this kind of thing with just regular old JavaScript. So what you would do is you would like link to a profile page. So and this will go to profile.html. So let's say we go to that page. Then in the JavaScript that is loaded in on profile.html, you need to get your profile data. So you fetch your profile data, but on your back end, you go, you can't get profile data unless you're logged in. So you need to send that token along with that fetch request. And if you don't, request fails, it comes back. And then what you do in the JavaScript for it is like, you have some function that's like window.location. It's just a redirect back to the main page. So if a 400 response came back, then you redirect to that. Or you redirect to generic profile or something like that. And if the request was successful, meaning your backend was able to validate your JOT and like get your user out and stuff and get all your profile data, well, then it comes back in the API response and then you display it on the page.
Well, how will the backend know I'm trying to think of a way to word it. Like, how will the backend know which user information to display?
Yes. Oh, so glad you asked that. Can anybody answer that question?
Because I know that the token has user ID in the payload, but how do you access that payload?
Anybody know? We did it in the auth series. Very end.
You decode the payload.
You decode the payload. And so then you're like, look up profile action. First step, decode the payload. Second step, get the user ID and look up that user. Third step, send that user's profile back.
Where does the decoding take place? Because I see in the authentication controller, that's
we
where
haven't
I
made it.
do
We
dot
haven't made the action
encode.
for it yet. Remember, this is step 2. Step 3 in the auth series was protecting a resource. That doesn't happen in the authentication controller. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So we'll make a profile HTML. Profile.html and a profile.js. So your front end. All right, our profile HTML. We'll just copy a bunch of stuff from the index HTML. And we'll have that link to profile.js instead. And we'll call this top secret stuff. And then in our app.js, I'll copy some of this too. Okay, so we have this top secret stuff. And this is going to, we first log in. We can do that like that immediate redirect actually. Something kind of like this. So if we don't have a token, I'll call this guard page. So if there is no token, then we want to window.location.href back home. So right up front, if we're not logged in, go ahead and just kick me back to the main page. Otherwise, go to make a GET request to localhost 4000's secret profiles route. And then go to parse the response. Actually, one other thing we need. So we want to send that token over also. So that's going to come in as an authorization header. And we can get that from local storage. But if you remember when we did this with Postman, they all start with the word bearer. got to put that in there too. So we'll say bearer local storage get item token. And then with our response, we'll parse it. And then we'll take top secret stuff and set its text content equal to response.secret stuff. Top secret stuff. Okay, so that's how that's going to look on the client. Questions about any of this? We should be able to, so I don't have a token right now. So if I try to go to my profile page, it should kick me back. And oops, invalid left hand. Yeah. All right, I won't be clever about it. Sorry, JavaScript. We'll say if not, all right. So now if I try to go to my profile page without a token, it just kicks me right back. You can see it for a sec, but it doesn't get any data. Nothing useful happens with it. It has guarded that route is the way you would say that. Cool, but what if I do have a token? What if I log in, I get a token, says I'm logged in, and I go to my profile page. So I'm here, I didn't get guarded, I didn't get kicked out, but now I need, it says at 404 on secret profiles. So easy enough. I'll go to routes. And if you make a GET request to secret profiles, send that to profiles index. So we need a profiles controller, Rails G controller profile. Oh shoot, I wanted that to be plural. If you ever make a mistake like I just did, I wanted to be plural, it's singular. You can go back and change the G to a D for destroy, and it'll undo it. All right, so I've got this profiles controller. And I want an index action. So first, I'm not going to protect anything. I'm just going to say render JSON top secret stuff. It's dangerous to go. All right, so if I do that, hey, it shows up on the page. Badass. Now I need to start protecting it. So our first layer of protection is going to be, is the token there at all? Did you even try to send me something? So I can say that the authorization header is request.headers authorization. So if you did not send me one, then I want to render JSON error no auth. Header present. Cool. So no auth header present. Now we wouldn't expect to see that because why would I can't even get to this page. I'll get bounced back before it even tries to make the request. Or here. This guard page, if this doesn't pass, I get kicked out. It doesn't even make the request. So why do I need to do that in the controller also? This is huge. Why do I need to protect the back end if I'm already protecting the front end?
Because you could send it from not the front end. You could send a request from anything.
I can set it from Postman. I can set it from whatever. Also, if it's running on your computer, you have control over it. So this client-side JavaScript, okay, well, I go over here, guard page, not anymore. Like, if it's on your computer, you control it. So you can't ever trust something that a client sends you. All right, so this means we did get an authorization header. We presumably want the token out of it. So we can say authorization header. We want to split on space, and that should give me the token. I'm going to need that secret again. So I can go to Rails, Applications, Secrets, Secret Keybase. And now I probably want that payload. So I can jot decode the token with the secret. Remember, that always gives you back an array. You gotta take the first one. And all right, now I have this payload. If it's not a valid jot or something like that, we probably want to throw that in a begin rescue block. Then we could do something like payload username, something like that. Or if it failed out, invalid token. Cool. I wonder if it works. Hey! It used something from my token. And go back here. I can log out. Protects the thing. If I log back in, I'm logged in. I can go to my profile page. That is practical auth. Questions?
Can you go back to your backend?
Yep. More questions?
So you're splitting the token to get the payload?
Yeah, so I'm splitting the, oh, I see what you're saying. So jot.decode always returns an array. This array only has one thing in it, but you can technically decode more than one token at once. So it's always going to return an array. So we just want the first decoded payload.
Okay. But then on line, oh, I don't know on Vim, but 3.
I'm here.
Yeah. So you're splitting that to get the payload and the secret. Those are like the 2 pieces of the token.
No, I'm doing this to get the token. Authorization header is the word bearer, a space, and then my token. I don't care about the bearer part or the space part. So I split it on the space, so I get an array with 2 elements, the word bearer, and then my token, but all I want is the token.
Got it. Okay.
So that ended up looking like this. Why not just leave off the word bearer? Because that's not how the spec works.
So if for Hannah's example, and she's like looking for a specific user's profile, how is this like a specific user?
Check that out. It knew my name because my name was in the payload.
So if the user's ID is in the payload, once you get user ID in the file you're looking at,
Yep.
okay, you're gonna find it. And then you can do stuff with that in this file, or would you push it to a different route or something?
So we'll talk about that in a sec. But yeah, I have the user right here, and I can user.get all my minions. I can do any active record thing that I could normally do with that. But I can look those up there. Now, the thing you were just alluding to, Hannah, is that, like, okay, well, what if I have more than one thing I want to authenticate? And I generally do. I don't want to copy all this authentication logic over and over and over again. And so, yeah, you put that into its own method. And that will end up looking like something like this. Yup, 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 yup. Take out that. And yup. All right, so we make this authenticate method, and then just call it authenticate. Like that. Oops. I don't have payload anymore though, but I do have user because I made user a instance variable. And then if I really want to beat the boss on this, I can take this authenticate method and put it in my application controller, which makes that available in every controller. And, oh man, I'm just going for broke at this point. Every single thing that I'd want to do, like if I also had a create in here, I'd probably authenticate at the beginning of that also. All right, well, that starts getting a little bit repetitive. So you can use this before action macro and say, I always want to run authenticate before any action. And then you can also scope that to something like this. Ta-da! Practical auth. What else?
So you wouldn't even really need the authentication controller anymore if you put everything inside of the like the application controller.
No, authentication controller is doing something completely different. What's the authentication controller doing?
It's creating a token.
Creating a token. It's verifying a username and password and then generating a token. We still need that. What this thing is doing is it's verifying a token, validating a token. Authentication controller generated it. This controller is making sure that I didn't just make up some bullshit. Two different things. What else?
I don't know how to phrase this right, but I think I'm still confused like on how you decode the token on the front end so you know like what user ID you're working with, so you know like what profile you should be going to.
So generally speaking, you don't decode tokens on the front end. You can, it's just pig Latin. There's absolutely ways to do that, but you generally don't read a token. So what you could do instead is, all right, after I've logged in, which came in on the Authentication Controller, I can send back that token. I can also send back anything else I want. So I could send back just a plain username that isn't in the token. And heck, I can keep that in local storage too. So whenever that comes back, I set that token. I could also set response.username. So I could do something like that. But also, I think this is like kind of at the heart of your question. Profile.html isn't Kyle's profile.html. It's not Lydia's profile.html. It's just profile. They all look the same. So when I look up these profiles, I send over my token, which only I could have. So we can look up just my profile stuff and then send it back. If I have my token, I can't get Lydia's profile. I can only get my token. What else would it be? So my top secret stuff is not going to be the same as Lydia's top secret stuff. Explain that back to me. It's all right. It might take a couple times. Give it a shot.
So basically, because you're sending a token to the backend and it's your token, the backend knows to send only the information that token that goes with that user that has that token.
Yeah, because it goes, all right, you gave me a token. All right, token checks out, got the token out, neat. So I'm pulling out the payload. That payload has this user ID here. That's the only user I know how to look up.
So do you have to go through a bunch of authentication stuff again if you are on the user's page, but you want the user to be able to change their own information?
Sure.
Like, do you have to, or since they're already logged in and accessing that page, can they just do it?
So let's think about what that means. So on their profile page, they see their profile. I changed some stuff. Okay, so on the front end, that's the front end's business. Like, so if I'm seeing this profile to begin with, that's really up to you as the front end developer to determine should they be able to type in these fields or not, or maybe only a super user can update someone's password.
Well, what I'm saying is, let's say you are on your user page and you want to change your username from Kyle to Kyle is awesome. How are you supposed to do that on the front end with a form if you don't have anything except the token?
So again, you can put more things in that login response if you want to. So like here, I also gave it the username. You could get that by decoding the token, but again, decoding tokens on the front end it's possible, and like there's some good use cases for it, but it's generally a sign you're going in the wrong direction. So let's say I send the username back whenever I log in. And then over here, that's also storing that in local storage. So then over in our profile.html page, make another form. And this one is called update username.
So are you showing us the ideal way to do this, or the way we should usually avoid trying to?
This is how you should probably do this if you don't get to use a front-end framework.
Okay.
So I can make another form here. All right, so I have this new username form here. Neat. So question is, I want to update Kyle to something else potentially. All right. Well, in this profile.js, actually, we don't even need that. And say old, let's see, call that username. And this is going to be class username class username. All right. Well, I have my username stored in local storage right now. So what I could do is say username.value, not text content because it's an input, it's value is local storage.getItem username. So that's going to pre-populate that input with whatever username is right now. So I'm going to log out, log in with Kyle and Kyle. I'm logged in. If I go over to application, I can see that I have the token. Oops, I don't have the username though. Where'd that go? Let's see if I pull that out of there. All right. Log out, deletes that. Go for Kyle and Kyle. All right, there's my username. So it has my username in local storage. Now, if I go to my profile page, it's reading that username out and putting it in this thing. That's what I have right now. I can update that to whatever. It's just an input field. I can just type whatever I want. Now, when that gets submitted, I call this update username. Update username. Update username. I can add a submit listener for that. And I can maybe make a request over to secret profiles. I'm going to make this a put request. Still need to send that authorization header over. And then maybe I don't know, redirect back home. So redirect Window.location.href is whatever. All right. So now I need a put handler on the back end. We go to the routes. A put to secret profile should go to update profile controller. So I make an update. I also will want that to authenticate. And maybe what this one does is, so we'll look up, we have the user already, and we want a user dot update username is params username. You could even like restrict that if you want to something like, well, I guess kind of already did that with the login, but let's say you were updating somebody else's account. That might be something like if not user to update is whatever your logged in user is. If not that, kick it back. It's unauthorized. You can only update your own stuff. Otherwise, you do whatever. But in this case, this is the only user profile I have any access to. I could say, all right, I want to update the user with whatever you sent over. It was already authenticated up here. Which would mean that I also need to send over that body. Probably should do all that stuff with the form also. Like that. There you go. And I'll bet it works. Maybe, we'll see. All right, so I am logged in. I go to my profile page. I want my new username to be Kyler. All right, and it sent me back here. So I should be able to log in with Kyler as my username. Oops, didn't like something. Let's see what happened in the logs. No, that worked. I'll bet it's because it made that extra account. Let's see, select all from users. Oop, blew out the username. That's not good. So I'm sending over this. Oh, I need to tell it that it was content type application JSON. So username comes back. Username's there. Updates here. Good, good, good. All right, I'll try it again. So I log out. I'm logged in. I go to my profile page. Change that to Kyler. I'll take a look at the network on this too. Oh, probably helps if I like actually respond to it too. At you. Cool. All right, so that looked like that worked. Yeah, the username came in correctly. So if we go back to this database, run that again. All right, there's Kyler. So now I should be able to log out and log back in with Kyle, and it logs me in. And I can go over here and say it's dangerous to go alone, Kyler. Pre-populates my username and everything. Pretty cool. What else? Things like which user is logged in and getting the username and routes and protecting routes, all that stuff is a little bit easier with front-end frameworks, but the auth parts of it are the same. All comes back to that. We make a user, hash their password, create the account. When we log in using that username and password, we validate it, give them a token back. Store that token in local storage, and then send it along with whatever requests that we're making. We validate the token and either go, cool, worked out, here's all your top secret stuff. Otherwise, we go, nice try, asshole. Then we send that back to the client, and the client does whatever it wants with it. Questions? Cute show. What do you call it? The Aristocrats. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good lunch.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Kyle. This was super helpful.
I'm so glad.